Hey there, folks. Welcome back to Succinct Psychology, or as we like to call it, Succinct. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and this video is going to be a continuation of my previous video covering Chapter 5 in Principles of Social Psychology. Alright, so communicators who speak confidently, quickly, and in a straightforward way are seen as more expert than those who speak in a more hesitating and slow manner. And so, for example, taking regular speech and speeding it up by deleting segments of it so that it sounds the same but actually goes faster makes that same speech more persuasive. And this is probably in part because a faster speech makes the communicator seem more like an expert, but also because a faster speech reduces the listener's ability to come up with counter arguments while he or she is listening to the message. And so effective speakers frequently utilize this technique, and some of the best persuaders are those who speak quickly. In general, we can say that communicators are more effective when they help us feel good about ourselves. That is, by appealing to the self-concern. So for instance, attractive communicators are frequently more effective persuaders than are unattractive ones. Attractive communicators create a positive association with the product they're trying to sell and put us in a good mood, which makes us more likely to accept their message. And we're also more persuaded by people who we perceive as similar to us in terms of our opinions and values than those who we perceive as being different. So when communicators are perceived as attractive and similar to us, we tend to like them, and we tend to trust people that we like. And so trustworthy communicators are effective because they allow us to feel good about ourselves for accepting their message, and often without critically evaluating its content. So although we're generally very aware of the potential that communicators may deliver us messages that are inaccurate or designed to influence us, and we're able to discount these messages that come from sources that we don't view as trustworthy, there is an interesting situation where we may be fooled by the communicator. When we first hear that person's communication, we appropriately discount it, and so therefore it has little influence on our opinions. However, over time, there is a tendency to remember the content of a communication to a greater extent than to remember the source of a communication. And so as a result, we may forget over time to discount the remembered message. And this attitude change that occurs over time is known as the sleeper effect. The sleeper effect occurs when we initially discount the message given by an untrustworthy or non-expert communicator, but over time we remember the content of the message and we forget the source. And the result is an attitude change in the direction of the initially discounted message. So we see here in figure 5.2, we have a message from an expert that holds its ground. It starts at a positive attitude and it maintains across time. And then we have a message from a non-expert, which starts at a very low attitude, a negative attitude initially, and then as time goes on, you see that the message gets into a more positive light until eventually it's at about the same level of the expert, because you've probably forgotten the source of that message. Alright, so if we find that a communicator is cute, that the music in the ad puts us in a good mood, or that we perceive that people around us are liking the ad, we may just simply accept the message without thinking about it very much. And when this happens, we engage in spontaneous message processing. And this is when we accept a persuasion attempt because we focus on whatever is most obvious or enjoyable without much attention to the message itself. And so, for example, Shelley Shatkin found that students who were not highly involved in a topic because it didn't affect them personally were more persuaded by a likable communicator than an unlikable one, regardless of whether the communicator presented a good argument for the topic or a poor one. On the other hand, students who were more involved in the decision were more persuaded by better messages than poor ones, regardless of whether the communicator was likable or not. So they weren't fooled by the likability of the communicator. When we process messages only spontaneously, our feelings are more likely to be important. But when we process messages thoughtfully, cognition prevails. When we care about a topic, find it relevant, and have plenty of time to spend thinking about the communication, we're likely to process that message more deliberately, carefully, and thoughtfully. And in this case, we elaborate on the communication by considering the pros and cons of the message and questioning the validity of the communicator and the message. And so thoughtful message processing occurs when we think about how the message relates to our own beliefs and goals and involves our careful consideration of whether that persuasion attempt is valid or not. So the messages that we deliver may be processed either spontaneously, and other terms for this include peripherally or heuristically, or thoughtfully. And other terms for this include centrally or systematically. And so spontaneous processing is a more direct, quick, and involves an affective response to the message. Whereas thoughtful processing is a more controlled and involves a more careful cognitive elaboration of the meaning of the message. So we see here in figure 5.3, we have a spontaneous attitude change where we're delivered the message, then we have an affective response such as it makes me happy, and then an attitude change. Then we have, in contrast, a thoughtful attitude change where we're delivered the message, we have a cognitive elaboration of that message, and then it leads to an attitude change. So this just kind of helps you see the differentiation between those two types of attitude changes, spontaneous and thoughtful. Alright, so both thoughtful and spontaneous messages can be effective. But it's important to know which is likely to be better in which situation and for which people. When we can motivate people to process our message carefully and thoughtfully, then we're going to be able to present our strong and persuasive arguments with the expectation that our audience will attend to them. If we can get the listener to process these strong arguments thoughtfully, then the attitude change is likely to be strong and long-lasting. On the other hand, when we expect our listeners to process only spontaneously, for instance, if they don't care much about the message or if they're busy doing other things, well then we don't need to worry so much about the content itself, because even a weak but interesting message can be effective in this case. In addition to being motivated to process the message, we have to also have the ability to do so. If the message is too complex to understand, we may rely on spontaneous cues, such as the perceived trustworthiness or expertise of the communicator, and ignore the content of the message. When experts are used to attempt to persuade people, for instance in a complex jury trial, the messages that these experts give may be very difficult to understand. And in these cases, the jury members may rely on perceived expertise of the communicator rather than his or her message. And so they're persuaded in a relatively spontaneous way. Alright, up until this point, we've focused on techniques designed to change attitudes. But it's also useful to develop techniques that prevent attitude change. And one approach to improving an individual's ability to resist persuasion is to help the person create strong attitudes. Strong attitudes are more difficult to change than our weak ones, and we're more likely to act on our strong attitudes. So one method for increasing attitude strength involves forewarning. And this is giving people a chance to develop a resistance to persuasion by reminding them that they might someday receive a persuasive message, and allowing them to practice how they will respond to these influence attempts. Forewarning seems to be particularly effective when the message that's expected to follow the attacks of an attitude that we care a lot about. So in these cases, the forewarning prepares us for action, and so we bring up our defenses to maintain our existing beliefs. So forewarning can be effective in helping people respond to persuasive messages that they'll later receive. A similar approach to help build up the cognitive component of attitude is by presenting a weak attack on the existing attitude with the goal of helping the person create counter-arguments about a persuasion attempt that's expected to come in the future. And this procedure, which is known as inoculation, involves building up defenses against persuasion by mildly attacking the attitude position. Now, one difficulty with forewarning and inoculation attempts is that they may boomerang. If we feel that another person, for instance a person who holds power over us, is attempting to take away our freedom to make our own decisions, we may respond with strong emotion, completely ignore the persuasion attempt, and perhaps even engage in the opposite behavior. Alright folks, this is going to conclude my second video covering Chapter 5 in Principles of Social Psychology. talk a little bit about changing attitudes through persuasion. I hope you learned a few things, and I'll see you guys next time.